Welcome back to another Explainer. Today we're jumping straight into a structured, completely neutral look at one of the most intensely debated topics in our culture right now, transgender athletes in women's sports. We're going to break down a highly polarized commentary video called A Righteous Perspective. And look, our goal here is absolutely not to take a side. We're just here to unpack exactly how these arguments are built, how they're framed, and how they're delivered by the different voices in our source material. We've got some really fascinating layers to peel back today, so let's get into it. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for navigating these opposing viewpoints. We'll hit A, sporting controversy, the biological argument, the wedge issue perspective, rhetoric and analogies, and finally, the broader implications.
Starting right off with Section 1, a sporting controversy.
Every major debate needs a spark, right? Well, for this source material, that spark was a massive media storm around WNBA player Sophie Cunningham. During an ESPN interview, she got asked point blank about her stance on biological men competing in women's sports. Her unapologetic answer went totally viral. She said, and I quote, "There's room for absolutely everyone here, but I'm also there to love biological women, and I think that there are rights that need to be protected." The commentator in our source video absolutely loves this approach. He points out that Cunningham doesn't frame her stance as hate toward the trans community at all. Actually, she roots it in common sense, her own morals, and this protective instinct for young girls in sports. But, nuance doesn't always survive on the internet. The source highlights the massive wave of backlash Cunningham got, with critics straight up dubbing her MAGA Barbie online. On top of that, the host notes that organizations like her own league, the WNBA, and the Indiana Fever reportedly distanced themselves from her after the interview. From the host's perspective, she's being completely unfairly targeted and politically labeled just for expressing her Christian conservative-leaning values about biology.
Now, to fight back against the idea that Cunningham is just out there on the fringe, the host throws out a really bold claim. He calls this an 80-20 fight. Basically, he argues that despite all the noise from league officials and the media, 80%, so the vast majority of the American public, actually agrees with Cunningham about keeping women's sports for biological females. By framing it as an 80-20 split, the host is trying to position her view as the silent majority, not some radical outlier.
Moving right along to Section 2, the biological argument. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is it gets to the absolute core thesis of the source video, the idea that sports divisions have to be based strictly on biological realities, period. To back this up, the host points to the famous case of swimmer Lia Thomas. He cites that Thomas went from ranking somewhere in the 400s while competing against men all the way to number 1 after transitioning and competing against women. For the host, that math right there is all the proof you need that transitioning doesn't erase inherent biological advantages. And he follows that up with this rapid-fire list of physiological traits to explain exactly why biological males have an innate edge. We're talking greater skeletal muscle mass, bigger muscle fibers, more upper body strength, higher bone density, higher hemoglobin levels for carrying oxygen, even larger heart and lung capacity, the whole shebang. For him, rattling off these biological facts isn't hateful, it's literally just acknowledging basic science. So what does he do with all this data? He ties it directly back to the original intent of Title IX. The host argues that is the reason why they created separate categories for women, so they could actually compete on an equal playing field. In his mind, women's sports divisions exist for the sole purpose of countering these physical advantages, just to make things fair. Okay, Section 3, the wedge issue perspective. Let's look at the flip side. To give us the full dialectic view here, the source material brings in counterarguments from U.S. soccer star Megan Rapinoe. And wow, she completely reframes the entire debate. She pulls it out of the biology lab and throws it straight into politics. She says, they're going after trans people in sports, and they're using this as a wedge issue because we love sports, when really what we're attacking is women. She's arguing that obsessing over a tiny number of trans athletes is just a manufactured distraction for a much larger political agenda. And this brilliantly illustrates the clash of perspectives we're dealing with today. On the left side of the slide, the stated goal of commentators is all about protecting girls and the integrity of sports. But on the right side, Rapinoe claims the actual goal, specifically calling out groups like the Heritage Foundation, is to roll back broader women's rights, go after Title IX, and restrict reproductive rights. To her, this whole sports debate is basically a Trojan horse.
And Rapinoe gets super specific here. She's not just talking in abstracts. She warns about proposed legislation, like a bill in Washington state, that would actually require physical sex tests for female athletes. She describes these as highly invasive genital exams, just to prove a girl is a woman. She points out that historically, policing women's bodies like this never ends well. And she makes a really sharp point that Black girls will likely face a disproportionate amount of this questioning and scrutiny.
So how does the video host respond to that? Well, he actually addresses it head-on. He impartially admits that, hey, he hadn't heard about these specific invasive physical exams in his own research, but he thinks our panic is a bit extreme. He suggests the whole thing could be easily resolved without any invasive exams by just using standard blood tests to check for XX and XY chromosomes. To him, it's a simple medical fix.
Section 4. Rhetoric and Analogies.
In these debates, it's really vital to look not just at what people are arguing, but exactly how they're arguing it. A male guest in the source video uses a very personal story to hammer home that biological thesis. He talks about playing basketball against WNBA star Kelsey Plum. He totally admits she's an elite, incredibly talented player. But he claims that if he actually guarded her seriously, her world-class technique wouldn't be enough to overcome his natural size and strength as a biological male. He's using the story to say that skill just cannot bridge the biological gap.
Then that same guest takes his rhetoric a massive step further with a really provocative analogy. He tells the audience to imagine a race between dogs. Then suddenly a cheetah enters the race and just completely dominates. In his analogy, the dogs represent biological female athletes and the cheetah represents trans female athletes. By using this extreme imagery, he's trying to make the biological gap look so incredibly wide that no amount of human effort could ever make it a fair fight.
Let's move to and see how this builds into our final synthesis. Section 5, the broader implications.
By unpacking this single commentary video, we've basically looked at a microcosm of a much bigger culture war. We're looking at two camps staring at the exact same issue but speaking completely different languages. The biological view, which the host and Sophie Cunningham hold, sees this strictly through the lens of physiology. To them, it's just fairness, common sense, and protecting a space for females. But the societal view, championed by Rapinoe, sees this purely through the lens of civil rights. To her, it's a manufactured wedge issue designed to police women and strip away rights. Because these starting premises are literally worlds apart, it's no wonder the debate is so fiercely polarized.
So what does this all mean? As sports inevitably continue to evolve, how is our society going to balance these strict, undeniable realities of physical biology with a deeply fundamental human desire for inclusion and acceptance? There are definitely no easy answers here today, but figuring out the architecture of these arguments is the crucial first step. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Definitely keep questioning the narrative, and I'll catch you in the next one.